Well, hello and welcome. Glad that you're with us again as we continue our chronological read through of the Bible. When we left Abraham yesterday, two of his visitors were making their way to Sodom, and the Lord, his third visitor, had remained to explain to Abraham why they were going there. Abraham perceived that the cities would be destroyed for their evil, and he requested that the cities be spared if ever smaller numbers of righteous people were found to be there, finally ending with only 10. It was probably less that Abraham expected God to find 10 people there than that Abraham was confident that God would not mete out the same punishment on the righteous as the wicked that allowed Abraham to at that point retire to his tent, satisfied that the Lord would do what was right. So we pick things back up in chapter 19, and we follow the two angels into Sodom. It's kind of difficult reading, chapter 19 is. Lot is sitting at the gate of the city when the men arrive. Lot at this point does not recognize them as anything other than two men traveling, and he prevails on them to stay with him in his house because Lot knows it's not safe for them to stay in the town square. The men of the city find out that these guys are there. That's pretty easy to do. Everybody knows everything that's going on in a town like that. And they come to Lot's house to accost the Lot's guests. Well, Lot first offers the mob two of his daughters, which, quite frankly, is equally evil. And it's only when the angels take charge, get all of Lot's family into his house, and strike the mob with blindness that the threat finally goes away. The angels then tell Lot to leave with all of his family because the city's going to be destroyed. Well, Lot and his wife hesitate. Hesitate so much that the angels finally physically take the hands of Lot and his wife and his two daughters and lead them out of the city. Lot has other daughters as well, but they're already married, and their husbands just think that, well, they just don't believe Lot, so they all stay. Once out of the city, the angels send Lot and his family on their way, telling them not to look back. Well, Lot's wife does look back and is turned into a pillar of salt. The cities of Sodom and Gomorrah are utterly destroyed by fire, as will all of the earth on the last day. Abraham sees the destruction from far away, but God has granted Abraham's prayer. He granted Abraham's prayer by preserving the lives of Lot and his daughters, as he will preserve all of his own on the last day. Well, Lot's troubles are far from over. He and his daughters first go to a city named Zoar, but then they move up into the hills and live in a cave. It's not really clear why Lot did that, other than that he was afraid to live in Zoar, although he had specifically requested permission to go there instead of the hills where the angels had first told Lot to go. But whatever the case, Lot ended up where the angels had told him to go in the first place. Now, Lot and his daughters were living in a cave. And Lot's daughters became afraid that they would not be able to find husbands. They were isolated, so they wouldn't have any children to continue to carry on the line. So they schemed to have them by Lot. They would get Lot drunk so that he didn't know. In their weakness, they resorted to an end justifies the means mentality, taking into their own hands what they felt needed to be done rather than trusting God to protect and provide, as God had already demonstrated to them that he would do. But still, God in his mercy protects and provides for them in spite of their sins. Actually, God makes each of the two sons a father of great nation. One becomes the father of the Moabites, and the other becomes the father of the Ammonites. Both of those people will figure into the story of salvation again at a later date. Abraham suffers again from weakness as well, just as we do. Abraham travels into another part of the land that he's been promised by God for his descendants, and he comes into contact with a powerful king named Abimelech. Well, just as he did with the Egyptians 20 years earlier, Abraham claims Sarah as his sister, which she is. She's a half sister, but he doesn't claim her as his wife. So once again, Sarah finds herself in a harem. And once again, the ruler who has the harem finds himself beset with all kinds of illness. God himself delivers the news to Abimelech that Sarah is Abraham's wife. And he tells Abimelech that God, has kept him from her. But Abimelech must return Sarah immediately and ask Abraham to pray for him so that he, Abimelech, can live. It's totally amazing. God works through imperfect people. I mean, Abraham still does not trust God to protect him after all these things that have happened. And at the same time, God puts the fear of God into people who might otherwise harm Abraham. So here Abraham is afraid that God won't protect him, and at the very same time, God is protecting him, just as Abraham feared he wouldn't. Well, finally, in chapter 1, we finally come to the birth of Isaac. It's been so long. One can only imagine the joy and the wonder that brought. God's promise was fulfilled. Isaac, the one through whom the covenant would flow, was circumcised according to that covenant on the 8th day. When Isaac was weaned, though, trouble came back into the household again. Sarah grew concerned over Ishmael's behavior with Isaac, and Sarah insisted that Hagar and Ishmael be cast out, so Ishmael would in no way be able to share in Isaac's inheritance. Now, Abraham opposed the idea, but God told him to do as Sarah wished and not to fear, because God would make a great nation of Ishmael too. So, as God commanded, Abraham sent Hagar and Ishmael off with some water and some bread. Hagar and Ishmael wandered around in the wilderness until Ishmael collapsed, and Hagar left him under a bush to die. She sat across, probably under another bush, crying out to the Lord. But God told her not to fear, that he was going to make a great nation of Ishmael. And then he opened her eyes to a well that in her wanderings God had guided her to. God was with Ishmael, and he was eventually given a wife from the land of Egypt. Now, we return back to Abraham. Abimelech seeks out Abraham again. He wants to make a treaty with Abraham because he fears Abraham. He knows that God is with Abraham. So Abraham agrees to make this treaty. But at the same time, he resolves an issue with a well that Abraham had dug that Abimelech's men had, hijacked, I guess would be the way to put it. They had done it without Abimelech's knowledge, but still, they had hijacked Abraham's well. So Abimelech solves that problem, and he and Abraham strike a treaty. And when we leave Abraham at the end of chapter 21 today, all is well. Abraham is living and traveling peacefully in the land of Philistines, and things will remain quiet until when we return tomorrow, we begin to hear the account of God asking Abraham to sacrifice Isaac, truly a severe test of Abraham's faith. Well, may God be with you and bless you. Today's reading is hard, but I pray that through that reading you will continue to grow and to be comforted by the fact that in spite of our sin, God still works with us. God still deals with us. God still redeems us. God still uses us to accomplish his purposes. I'll see you again tomorrow.